Whoa! Yes.
Yeah, the 22nd, it's this Sunday, and then the 31st. So that's the day after
first.
Memorial Day. So,
Great work.
this Sunday we're at the Blue Collar Stadium.
Coliseum.
No bucks, no game, just awards. Awards and a minor league baseball game if he wants to stay for it. And then he's going to play on the field under the lights. He's got his own jersey, they got him a new jersey and all that stuff. Alright, I'll see you.
Yes.
What's that? No, 12 o'clock. 1 o'clock the game starts, awards are at 12, the baseball game starts at 1.
Pills.
Alright, where are we going?
Some for cassette.
You got it, bud. I'm going to put that back there.
We'll start the 2 years.
Okay.
Some for cassette. A bone door. Neck. 232.
Hey, this is Scott Weidenkowitz from Photocrati, and you're listening to my favorite photography business podcast,
238.
the Sprouting Photographer Podcast.
Welcome to the Sprouting Photographer Podcast. Proven strategies, interviews, and insights that help professional photographers with the business of being creative. Here's your host, Brian Caparici.
Thanks for joining me. My name is Brian Caparici, and welcome to episode 238 of the Sprouting Photographer Podcast. Today on the podcast, Rob and I are sitting and talking about business workflows for .com/2.
Queen Street.
Now, hey, we're going to do something kind of fun and different today. Here in the intro, we actually have a giveaway on the podcast. A friend of ours here in the area is running a Kickstarter campaign store, and again, just leave us a quick rating and review for the show. Tell us what you think of the show. Tell us if you love it, what you want to see us improve. Give us an honest rating. We'd really love to hear from you. And again, if you do that, you will be entered into the contest to win one of these Foxy Friends. If you're interested in...
And now, here's today's expert interview with Brian, talking all about the business of photography.
Hello, and thanks for joining us once again here on SproutingPhotographer.com. I am Rob Knoll, here again with Brian Caparici. Hey, Brian. Hi, Rob. How's it going? I am doing very well. Yeah, I found early on,
We'll
before
start
we
the
were
2
even
years.
using computers much in the business, we really needed to get organized with systems. So we had, this is nice, you can track your clients on a computer. And it was all downhill from there. Well, these things are supposed to make our lives easier. They are, but they don't always, do they? Right, no. And I think that's the thing, is even when people, do you find that photographers are any less stressed? I don't. Like, I talked to so many people. I had a workshop at my studio last night. There were 20 photographers there, and lots of them were struggling with the busyness, right, of their studio, and just trying to keep all the balloons underwater at the same time. And should be considered a system. I think the word system and workflow can sort of be used interchangeably. And we need to look at all the different things that we do in our business that we do repeatedly, and not only find ways to make them more consistent, but find ways to optimize them and to streamline them. Because I think most photographers, like you said, and we've talked about this many times on the podcast, most photographers just get so overwhelmed when you get in the busyness of the season, whether it's springtime if you're a portrait photographer, or if it's summer if you're a wedding photographer, whatever it is, whatever season that you're in right now, it's so easy to become overwhelmed by that. And unless you've got refined systems and a really clear, refined workflow, you're going to find yourself back in that place.
Yeah, and I think the thing is you've got to let some things go as well. You got to get rid of the clutter. It's interesting. Last night there's an example where one person told me, this other photographer and I are just getting a new studio, and we're going to be sharing the studio. We need, of course, to be on the same calendar for booking purposes and so forth. And I said, well, that shouldn't be difficult. And she goes, we just wish there was a way that we could, Mark, I'm like, well, are
are you not both on Google Calendar? And she's like, oh, I don't like Google Calendar. All my personal stuff is on iCal. So she's trying to do 2 different calendars all the time. And I was like, okay, but that resistance to change is
Right.
just inefficient.
Yeah.
So at some point you just have to make a decision, pick one, and just go with that.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to balance all these different things, just because that's the way you've always done it. Right? So sometimes you just have to make those hard decisions in order to get the efficiency to move forward.
Right.
So one of the things that I think is super important is understanding that you need to put everything in its place. You know, have a place for everything and put it in its place, and that helps you declutter things. Like, I think a lot of photographers probably spend more time, you know, with so many different things they don't really use or need, and as a result, they kind of clutter up their lives, their studios, their business with all kinds of unnecessaries. I think you really want to just start to take a hard look at your business and say, what do I actually really use?
Right.
What am I best at? And what do I have that I don't need?
Right.
Trim the fat, get rid of stuff you don't need.
Right.
And then, first of all, that usually lifts a huge weight off you. You
Right.
suddenly realize, oh wow, I don't need all this other stuff. I don't need to maintain it. I don't need to think about it. I only need to focus on what works. So I think that's a really good sort of formative step.
I think like, as it relates to workflow, that sort of like obsessive tinkering that we like to do as photographers, which
Yeah.
I think a lot of us are like that, where it's, you know, new app, new tool, new light, new this, new that. We sort of want to get in there and play with it and toy with it.
Yeah.
The problem is that you're in doing so, you're doing the opposite of what the workflow should be doing for you,
Yeah.
right? Like, the whole point of a workflow is to have a streamlined process, to be consistent, to be reliable, to be repeatable, so that you can kind of do things almost habitually, right? Or like almost as a routine. But by constantly tinkering and adapting new things and trying new things and buying new gadgets and gadgets and whatever, yeah, I mean, the clutter is one side of it, but the other side of it is it makes for an inconsistent workflow.
For sure.
So you're kind of never really doing anything in any streamlined
Well, if you go
fashion.
back to the example that you already mentioned, which is like the editing workflow, once people get their editing workflow down,
Right.
they rarely want to leave that.
Right.
Like, they don't change it and say,
Right.
oh, you know what, I think instead of using Lightroom, I'm going to now do Capture One Pro, you know, or something like that. They're not going to go jumping back and forth and saying, you know, well, maybe this one's better, maybe that's one. Once you feel comfortable in it, you stay with it.
Right.
And that becomes efficient in itself, because the more you practice at it, the faster you get at it.
Right. Yeah.
Therefore, the more efficient you are.
Yeah.
So unless something revolutionary comes along that everyone is sort of saying, hey, you really need to try this. And,
Right.
and there's nothing wrong with experimenting.
Sure.
But you should plan time to do that.
Right.
That's not in the midst of your regular workflow.
I think what it comes down to is like there's two sides of it, right? One is like the obsessive tinkerer that like never really has consistency because they're always playing with things, and the other is someone that gets so stuck in their ways that like they're still using paper filing, right? And they just resist change.
Yeah.
And I think that there's got to be a balance in there. I think that you have to almost give yourself like an audit period or a review, whether it's a quarterly or a semi-annually review, where it's like when you're give yourself a chance to work on your business. We talk about this all the time, being in CEO mode versus worker bee mode. Give yourself a chance to work on your business and sort of lay out these workflows, lay out these systems, lay out these processes, and then just stick with it. Kind of get your work,
Right.
you know? But at the same time, I think that there's a lot of merit. Like, there's two ways to sort of define a workflow, right? Or like to
Right.
create a process. One being you just keep trying and failing and trying and failing and trying and failing until you eventually land on something that works. And I think a lot of the time that's what we get to, because there's no school for photographers, right? There's no like, this is how you do it. I mean, there's ways,
Yeah.
but I guess the second way that I'm going to say is that things like our podcast or things like the many educational resources are out there that are photographers that have refined systems and they've really figured out the best way to do things, and they've tweaked and they've experimented and they put these ideas out there for you to try. Take that and then tweak it for what makes sense for you, you know?
Yeah.
But I think too often we get so obsessed with trying to like